There's a listener base of Gen Z listeners. What's your professional governmental input to these people for their career as Indians?
If you want to stay in India, joining the government, I think it would be a waste.
Joining the government.
Yeah, as usual, old style, bureaucratic. I mean, let's be very clear. Do you want to be Elon Musk or do you want to be a joint secretary?
Is the nature of the UPSC exam going to change?
I think it'll happen in the next decade. It'll happen faster than you think.
Electoral economics. Does that affect your job at all?
Not directly. I work with politicians, including the Prime Minister. But ultimately, they have to win the election. I don't.
If the current government doesn't get re-elected hypothetically, what happens to your job? These two wars, the Israel-Palestine war and the Ukraine-Russia war, how are they affecting our country?
From an economic perspective, it's generally a bad thing. It can be good for certain countries if they happen to find some commercial way of profiting from it.
Do you guys keep a track of journalists who are constantly spreading a narrative about, the Modi government is anti-Muslim and all that? I'm sure this news reaches you guys.
Increasingly, this narrative sounds... Clearly, India's relations with the Middle East have never been this good.
So let me be very open with you all and give you some behind the scenes realities when it comes to this experience of being a podcaster. When I'm podcasting with politicians, I have to approach it in a slightly journalistic manner and ask them the difficult questions. So the environment around those podcasts is not conducive for me to ask all my doubts about how the government operates, what the future of India is according to our current government, what the trajectory of India is according to the data. Lots of technocrats like Sanjeev Sanyal are often not willing to completely open up about the realities of the administration of India. I tried bringing you all the realities of the administration through this very, very special, very, very in-depth conversation. It's a slightly longer piece and I know that many of you are going to watch it till the end. I tried bringing you some very, very deep conversation to further your understanding about all the topics that you hear about at house parties, at social events, whether it's AI, whether it's global warming, whether it's obviously the economic trajectory of India. I highly recommend you watch the previous 2 episodes we've done with the legendary Sanjeev Sanyal. But this particular episode is a very free-flowing general conversation about the reality of India. It's a very special, very loaded episode of TRS. Sanjeev Sanyal sir returns on TRS. How are you, sir?
I'm really pleased to be here.
Okay. We had some pretty tight, effective, hyper knowledge-oriented conversations the last time. It was almost a year ago, actually, that I met you for the first time. A lot of time has passed. I think I've built out some more perspective after my political podcast phase and all these other podcasts we've had in that 1 year. So I think today's going to be more of a free flow.
All right, let's go for it.
What is your main message to Indians at this point in the Indian timeline? I know it's a very general, very open question, but that's exactly how I'd like to begin.
Well, you've really opened up the vista on this one. But anyway, look, it's pretty obvious to anyone that we are at some major turning point in our history, right? There's something clearly different about what we are going through. As a civilization, we are coming back. So, I work in the government. I'm an economic advisor to the Prime Minister. But let me say that I'm very conscious that I'm not just rebuilding an economy. I'm rebuilding a civilization after hundreds of years of decline. So while we talk about the fact that in the next 24 months, we'll be the world's 3rd largest economy, clearly India's position in the geopolitical hierarchy is clearly rapidly going up, and we can discuss that later. But it is more than just that. I mean, whether it's the rebuilding of the temple in Ayodhya or, the way we are engaging with our own history and so on, you can feel that something different is happening. And our generation is lucky to be here to have seen it.
Okay. After, you've created this internet presence of yours, I think over the last year, It's increased.
It's increased. Yeah, certainly increased.
And maybe perhaps this is a question which comes straight out of my heart because this is a content challenge I deal with.
Yeah.
Like you just spoke about the temple in Ayodhya.
Yes.
And I completely understand the perspective you're coming from.
Yeah.
But there's a big section of Indian urban audiences that understand English who'll possibly switch off from this conversation just because you've said temple in Ayodhya.
Well, I think that section of society is quite small. And I think it's important that people understand what that temple represents. I think too much is placed on the idea that, oh my God, there was a mosque there. I mean, look, there has been a very long period of struggle to rebuild this temple. Then there was a legal process to do it, and the temple was built. And I think most reasonable people, including Muslims, accept that at least the major centers of Hindu worship that were destroyed during the period of Turkic invasion and Mongol occupation should be now allowed to be rebuilt. And by the way, just 3 weeks after the rebuilding of the temple in Ayodhya, Prime Minister Modi visited the UAE and inaugurated a temple in Abu Dhabi, right? If the Emiratis don't have a problem with building a temple in Ayodhya or in their own country, I don't see why so-called Indian urban seculars need to get so worked up about it.
Do you guys keep a track of journalists who are constantly spreading a narrative about, oh, the Modi government is anti-Muslim and all that? Like, does this? I'm sure this news reaches you guys. But
no, it's you just have to be on Twitter to know this narrative. But I think increasingly this narrative sounds hollow, and I mean clearly India's relations with the Middle East have never been this good. I'm not just talking about the relationship with the UAE, but whether it's Oman or Saudi Arabia or even Qatar. I mean, we have historically not had great relations with them, but in the very recent past, we have 8 of our Navy personnel who had been put in prison there have been released. Prime Minister personally went to Qatar and so on. So our relations basically with Muslim countries have actually improved. In fact, they're the best ever. So I think we are unnecessarily, playing this on the back foot earlier. Other countries are fully capable of understanding the way we are thinking. If we are clear about what we are trying to do, what we are asking for is not very extreme. And we are going about it in a very systematic, legal, constitutional way of saying that, look, here are some important Hindu temples. They were destroyed in the course of history, and I don't think it's very unreasonable to have them re-established.
Okay. I have to ask you some actual economics related stuff so that we can dive deeper into the present. Okay, not everyone who watches the show understands economics in the first place. I hope that most people have at least seen one of the previous 2 episodes that we've done. So, one basic question for you. Explain the word per capita income to a 10-year-old and then also explain it in the way you'd explain it to a 45-year-old.
It's the same idea.
Difference?
So let me tell you what it is. So first you have to understand what GDP is. So GDP is the amount of value creation that the economy does overall. So all the salaries that we have paying out, all the profits of the system and so on. So all the value generation, i.e. the full output of the economy minus all the inputs of the economy. Okay. So that is the value generation. You do GST, you know what your value generation is. So imagine all of that, of the whole system being added. That is GDP. Now it's effectively the income of the economy for that year. Now, then we have 1.4 billion people, more than that, in fact. Now you have to divide that amongst everybody. So basically, per capita income is the average income of the average Indian. Okay. Now, obviously, there is a skew in distribution and all that. So that is not being captured by this. This is basically the mean of what the average Indian is earning. So it's basically GDP divided by the population.
In your office, is there a sense of geopolitical competition in a positive way? I'm not talking about hot war or economic wars at all. When you see Vietnam becoming a manufacturing hub or Indonesia growing, is there a positive sense of competition?
Look, these are friendly countries. Vietnam is a geopolitical ally. So we have no problem with them growing. I don't know why everybody makes a fuss about it. But again, be factual. We get 3 to 4 times more foreign direct investment than Vietnam. Okay? Look it up. Their economy is a fraction of our size. So I'm glad some investment is also going to them, and we live in a competitive world. Sometimes we'll win, sometimes they'll win. It's fine. But to say that they have won the China plus one strategy, or they have taken all the manufacturing FDI, that's totally not the case. As I said, you have to look at the facts. Just go back again, same IMF website, look at their FDI in 2023 or 22, maybe the latest data now available, and look at how much we are getting. It will be usually 3-4 times their size. And our economy is maybe 8 times their size. Just go and check what the data is. I don't remember off the top of my head, but you can pull it up on your...
Okay, so I think Atharv has pulled out something. Looks like a pretty self-explanatory graph.
So if you look here again, this is the FDI graphs of India and Vietnam. You can see that till 2000, both of us were not getting very much FDI, but then India began to gather pace, and then more recently, Vietnam has also gathered pace. As I keep telling you, whether it's Bangladesh or Vietnam, I wish them well. But to say that all the FDI is going off to Vietnam is not true. We are clearly getting more FDI than Vietnam, but of course they are a smaller country, so in a sense, each dollar is a bigger bang for their buck. But in absolute terms, we are getting more, more FDI than Vietnam is by some margin, as you can see.
The engineer in me sees 2 spikes in 2008 and 2020.
Yeah.
Could you explain those 2 spikes?
Those are simple to explain. You see, you have to understand that when you have dramatic reductions in interest rate in the world because of whatever reason, say in 2020, 21, you saw the COVID thing. So dramatic reduction. So there's lots of liquidity in the world. There's lots of money in the world. And that money is then available for investing. So in both 2008, there was a crisis. And there was a 2020, 21, there was a crisis. So in both cases, the Fed cut interest rates. There was lots of money sloshing around. So that resource some part of it ended up being diverted to us.
So when the Fed cuts interest rates,
yes,
rich people all over the world, I'm assuming, especially...
It's not just rich people, corporations, even middle class, whatever.
I'm simplifying. Okay, people with money say that, hold on, now where should I put my money in order to make it increase as fast as possible? That's what leads to FDI increases.
Some part of that, I mean, at a very, very simple level, that's what happened. FDI is done by corporations. So corporations suddenly are flooded with cash, or they can borrow it if necessary. And then some part of that money ends up in places like India.
Okay.
Or Vietnam or Bangladesh. And as I keep saying that, look, we are all sort of beneficiaries of this process.
At these points, what happens to the FDI graphs of America?
So you see, FDI, by the way, America is both a recipient of FDI and a source of FDI for other countries. So I don't know off the top of my head what the net figure is, but people forget that America itself is a huge recipient of FDI from other countries. I don't know what the net number is at the end of it. So there you go. They're also getting huge amounts of FDI, and they're.
What happens in 2015 that they get this spike? Is it the presidential election?
No. You first of all, don't get too obsessed about individual spikes.
Okay.
It depends on decisions get at certain point in time. I think this is a net number. So as some there was a sudden drop down, must be money's going out or whatever. I haven't studied this particular graph, but what I'm trying to say is that don't get too worked up about, there are one very big investment can skew the thing, or they can be bunching for maybe by pure chance sometimes. Gotcha. So look over a period of time, you can see that America is a major recipient of FDI in its own right, even as it is giving FDI out to other countries. But you've got the general idea.
Yes.
So I think the overarching point is, look, there is a lot of people are now looking at a China 1+1 strategy.
Yes.
People are pulling out that money. They are going to other countries. We are a beneficiary of that. Vietnam is also a beneficiary of that. This idea that everything is going there and not coming to us is not true. We are getting, as you saw, getting more FDI than Vietnam is. But yes, I mean, they're a smaller country, so per capita or whatever, they were maybe doing better than us. But that's not the point. In sheer size, we are getting more. And similarly, in Bangladesh also, they are getting, in certain areas, they are doing well. And I think we should stop obsessing about just the fact that other countries do well. Yes, good for them. And as I said, these are friendly countries. Why are we holding it against them?
The reason I'm doing such a random conversation with you is because I've never ever studied economics even in school.
Okay.
So this is the closest I get to getting educated by an expert like yourself. So don't mind the random deep dives. And I would also represent a large section of the audiences who have been grilled to become doctors and engineers since they were kids.
Okay.
So when we say 8% growth this quarter, can you boil it down in a very simple way in terms of it's basically...
incomes of the whole system is growing.
No, but the income, I asked you this the last time also. Does it effectively mean we're exporting a lot of...
No. So here, this is the important part. While we are going through this growth phase, it is the case that unlike China, which had the benefit of very high GDP growth when it was going through the high GDP growth phase, it was exporting a lot because the world was a better place. We are not in such a good place today because the world is actually going through a lot of
wars.
Wars.
War-like
Also,
situation.
many of our markets are declining. Like Germany, Japan, UK are in recession and so on. So it's much more difficult to use exports to grow. So we are having to generate it almost entirely internally through investment and so on. Now, obviously, it will be much more helpful if we were able to do it with the help of...
a better situation all over the world.
Yeah. Now, that may turn up in the future, in which case we'll grow even faster. But let's see, right now we are managing it entirely on our own. And that is not a trivial thing.
A bit of a recap. Again, I'm trying to go into first principles thinking here. If you personify India, okay, it's a person whose income is increasing at 8%. Fair to say? Please correct me if you disagree. Where is that extra money coming from into our economy if it's not coming through exports?
It is coming from basically from the fact that there's been an uptick in investments. Initially, government investment, a lot of the infrastructure. You live in Mumbai, you can see huge infrastructure being built around you. Coastal road, under metro system, etc. That creates jobs and creates demand for steel, cement, and so on. So that is one part of it. Now there is increasingly also, you're seeing private investment. So you are seeing all these new factories coming up that's also happening around you, your Pune and so on. So all of that is happening. Now there is also FDI coming in. There are all these fab plants being built. Micron is setting up something up the coast and so on. So that is what is generating a lot of this momentum. Houses are being built. I don't know if you suffer this, but I have a Delhi number, so I suffer Noida housing, advertising, direct calls coming through to me, telling me so and so. In fact, just before I entered your building, I got a call trying to market some Noida housing. So, I mean, all of this is also going on. The financial markets are doing well. That's another source of activity. So there's a lot of activity going on.
Effectively, see, I'm an engineer and I understand things based on, a flow of energy, for lack of a better way of explaining things. So even money, if you look at it as energy, I would only assume that the total amount of money in our system is increasing in my head through foreign direct investment, but also through
internal generation. But the internal generation is always the more important part.
Internal generation is through the government and through extremely rich Indians, effectively. Private sector and public sector.
Yeah, but there's a lot of it. The middle class is also borrowing and buying cars, borrowing and building a house. The very poor are using Prime Minister's Awas Yojana, where they take some government money, but a lot of it they spend themselves. So it is not the case that you are functioning like that. So that it's a national effort. It's not like rich Indians are only spending. So it's not the Ambani wedding that is solely responsible for economic growth.
No,
So if you take irrespective of how much money he spent on a national scale, it's peanuts.
Okay, maybe let me reframe the question. Okay, this is for the sake of better understanding. And I would love for you also to use a metaphor.
Yeah.
So I'll try pitching a metaphor to you and explain it to me that way.
Yeah.
Now imagine for a second that India is an ancient city.
Yeah.
Effectively, that city is getting richer.
Yes.
But a city gets richer through like an injection of money.
Not necessarily.
That's what I'm
So
asking.
you may, there are ancient cities now, you may decide to expand the city, or there may be some parts of the city that are crumbling. You widen the road, you build newer parts of it. So all of that creates space for economic activity. So for example, let's take Varanasi as a live example of this.
Go on.
And, we had all those narrow lanes in and around Kashi Vishwanath temple. You opened it up, cleaned it up. It's still, the old temple is still there, but you opened up the lanes, you laid out some new structures, etc. And now a lot more people can come to the same place. Now that has created economic activity in its own right. Now because that is happening, now more people can come. Therefore, not only are people coming here, there are also more people can come to Varanasi in general. That's creating jobs for transportation, restaurants, hotels, then also for the flights. And because all of this is happening and people have more money, even those who are living in Varanasi now are richer, so they are buying more cars or improving their houses and so on. So all of this is feeding through. So it doesn't need an injection. For example, the average human being on this planet is better off than they were 200 years ago.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean that the aliens from somewhere came and invested in this world. It happened through internal human effort. After all, the world's economy is a closed system. So a lot of it is anyway self-generated. Foreign investment helps to trigger the system to grow, but that doesn't mean that's the only source, and you need that. You need some money is good, some international linkages, technology, all of these are good things. And it's good to learn from the rest of the world, but it is not the case that it is the only driving force. Good part of it is internally generated. After all these construction that we are seeing of metros, etc., this, we are doing ultimately. Yes, there is some foreign, you may have a foreign collaborator, partner, etc., but that doesn't mean that.
I'm sorry I'm slowing you down in your thought process here, but it's just again for the sake of first principles thinking.
Yes.
So effectively, you spoke about how FDI is not the only source of an increase in size of the economy.
Yeah.
But that increase in size of the economy is also happening because of certain conditions that are built for the population to live and work, etc. So the whole game of economics is how do you build those conditions in order for that size of the economy to grow? That's all?
Yeah.
Would you like to add anything else? Because in my head, for anything to grow, where is that source material coming from? You said that the world is a closed system.
Yes. So source material coming from human effort.
Human effort.
That is the thing. We are redistributing stuff on this planet. I mean, this building is built of cement. It came from some limestone somewhere. We crunched it up into cement, dragged it here, put bricks, which we had also basically took sand or mud or whatever it is, turned it into bricks. And then we put it there, put this former limestone and this former clay into a thing, and we have constructed this building. So as a result of redistributing all of this, we have generated some value.
Is it trivial to use this energy transforms from one form into another in the domain of economics?
No, it isn't. This is the point. This is human effort, right? After all, this conversation we are having is coming out of material that's inside my head and inside your head. But this interaction has presumably generated some value because some people are watching this.
Gotcha.
Right. So that value didn't exist. Right. That conversation didn't exist before we had this. So human effort has created out of thin air value.
Gotcha.
Right. So GDP growth is most of that is not digging up mining. Otherwise, it would only be mining. Even agriculture is not that something is naturally growing from the ground and you are harvesting it. Right? Some farmer put some seed into the ground, watered it, therefore it generated rice. It is not that he just went and harvested it in thin air.
So the art of economics is your best attempt at creating those conditions in order to
allow this human effort to happen. And this is precisely what economics is about. You have the earth has limited resources. How do you distribute it in a way that, one, it gets used in a sensible way, and also encourages human effort and human striving to be able to generate this value? And therefore, how do you set up the system to do this? Those from a market orientation will argue that the best way to set this up is by creating incentives for people to take risks and try and capture as much of value of that, in whether through personal wealth or whatever other thing, whatever personally as individuals drive them.
Okay.
Whereas the socialist view would be that no, that this leads to bad outcomes, and so you need a state that forces people to do things as top down as whatever the social planner thinks is the correct thing to do. That is basically the difference. I mean, I'm taking two extreme examples, but basically that is the difference between a socialist view where the sarkar tells everybody what they should do, and the other is where the sarkar's job is to create the conditions for people to do their own thing.
Gotcha. I've learned a couple of things from you over the course of our few conversations. The first is that there is a bit of an art of economics angle in terms of every economist will look at economic policy in his or her own way.
Yes.
And you never know until it's actually turned into actual policy and laws and applied. And then you see the population interacting with your theoretical conjecture.
Yes.
Then it may work, it may not work. Every economist is also bringing his or her own personality and emotions into their technical work. That is what the art form is.
Yes.
Fair to say? Okay. Is it frustrating that I'm doing this recap with you, asking you to?
No, I mean, that's fine. I mean, it's good that that people may want to recap it in this fashion. Yes.
Is there anything else you'd like to add to this first principles thinking conversation? Because we'll dive deeper after this.
No. Fine. That I think hopefully people have caught on to this.
Very simple question for you. There's a listener base of Gen Z listeners.
Okay.
Which is people effectively born after 1997. But for the sake of conversation, I'll say 1995, people under the age of 30 right now in 2024. In this new age, which is governed by technological advancement and artificial intelligence and possibly robotics in the near future. Keeping all these factors in mind, what's your professional governmental input to these people for their career as Indians, as young Indians who are hopeful about their careers? What's your input? Again, very wide question. Take it wherever you wish.
Yeah, I mean, this is a almost impossible question. But anyway, let me say that, look, as we have just discussed, we happen to be living in a particularly exciting country and an exciting point in time. Okay, 15, 20 years ago, it may have been different. And who knows how it'll be in 15, 20 years from now. But at this point in time, this is like being in the hub of things. There are lots of new things being built. This is where completely new vistas can be created. I mean, you have created a career out of a completely new area. So there are many such new areas coming up in India right now because, as I said, we are going through that phase where we are literally for the first time building many things. And there is also new technologies like AI, drones, etc., that are blossoming. And there is huge things to be created in India, from building better museums to building better roads to all kinds of new things. So this is an exciting place to be. Now, it's a messy place to be because obviously it's like living in a construction zone. It's like Mumbai as we speak, right? There's a lot of excitement about all the new infrastructure being built, but it's uncomfortable because as the thing gets built, it's like living in a construction zone. There's lots of dust, air pollution, roads jammed, etc. But you can feel the buzz at the same time. So I think if you want a comfortable life, then fine. Other parts of the world, or maybe even if you want to stay in India, joining the government, UPSC and all of that may be the way to do it. But I think it would be a waste. Because this is
joining the government.
Yeah, as usual old style bureaucratic, rigid pathways to building a career.
Damn.
That I think some people may want to do it. I'm not discouraging those who want. That is what they want to do. But in a sense, if you're not stuck up with being in that path, I think this is the moment in history to go out there and take risks. Take as many risks as possible. This is the moment to be a writer, a sportsman, a startup guy, set up your own podcast. This is the moment where these things will happen.
Wow. Okay. So I was eventually in this conversation going to ask you about this whole government jobs versus entrepreneurial fervor question.
Yeah, but let me say that when I say an entrepreneur, I don't necessarily mean you have to set up a company. Okay, I am more talking about having a much more free-flowing, risk-taking life. So that could happen by being a sports person. By the way, sports person is also an entrepreneur of a sort.
Yeah.
It could be you becoming an artist or a musician. Also, you can be a technologist. You can be a scientist. You may be working in a lab. You may be even a government lab. But that's quite different from being a bureaucrat, which is a more linear pathway. So when you are in an environment which is fluid and full of possibilities, I'm just saying that those of you who are either by temperament and have the resources to take a risk, this is the moment in history to take it.
Okay. The end outcome being what?
End outcome being, well, some of you will succeed over the top, some will not. That is fine. That's what risk taking is. But I think in a sense, you will participate in a real moment of rebuilding of a country and a civilization. And this is that moment.
Okay. Because I asked you such a general and wide question, I think you've processed it, and please correct me if I'm saying something wrong. You've processed it as a message to the masses of India. And generally the masses of India, when you actually scan the entire country and not just urban metros, like the places you and me are from, there is a general life goal of having extreme stability. Which is why government jobs are celebrated that much amongst the masses in terms of people will encourage.
So that's what I'm trying to break you out of.
You're trying to break the country out of.
Well, certainly the audience.
Okay. Go on.
So, you can, there was a time when we were a poor, slow growing, stodgy place. Being an entrepreneur, and maybe to some extent even today, was a difficult thing. You had to go out there, deal with, government inspectors, bribe them, deal with permits and so on. But slowly but steadily, we have broken out of that into a much more fluid, growing place. Now, I'm not saying there aren't problems. There are lots of problems. I'm sure being an entrepreneur is a problem, and not everybody who takes a risk is going to succeed. Even in the best of situations, a good proportion of them will fail. But for suddenly, we are a land of opportunity in many ways. Like America may have been in the 20th century, right? This is where you went to make it. Now, even there, good proportion of people who tried to make it failed. But it was there was this edginess to the place. So it's not for everybody. There are lots of people who are probably temperamentally set for leading a much more stable government job kind of life. And they should perhaps do that. I'm just saying that for the first time, for those who have temperamentally have the capability, have the resources, whatever it may be, this is the moment. If you can think of a great idea, just do it.
Have you watched 12th Fail?
No, I have not.
Okay. It opened my eyes about the truth about the masses, especially, say, in the 90s. It depicted the 90s and early 2000s, and I'm sure we live in a very different time now.
20 years have passed, so the world has changed.
I do believe that becoming an IAS officer, IPS officer, it's a very, very heartfelt and huge
No,
goal.
so there may be a lot of people who want to do that. And they should. All I'm trying to say is that is a very limited view of the possibilities of the world. Yeah. I mean, let's be very clear. Do you want to be Elon Musk or do you want to be a joint secretary?
So you're saying culturally we need to shift into...
We are shifting. This is happening, whether you like it or not.
Maybe a sharper way of asking you this question, sir, is because you also work with the government. I would love to know what the present role of the bureaucracy is with respect to the government, as well as where the future is going.
See, the Indian bureaucracy was created essentially by the British to control the population. Okay? When we say the steel frame of India, okay, this is sometimes this idea is attributed to Sardar Patel, but in fact, it relates to a British prime minister just after the Jallianwala Bagh massacre. What is the steel frame? It's a cage. It held together India after the Gadar revolt, the Jallianwala massacre, and so on. And so this was really meant to control the country. Okay. Now, independence happens. Now you would think that you're going to change things. You don't. You basically opt instead to going into a socialist economic model that actually gives the bureaucracy even more powers. So by the time 1991 comes, you actually have a bureaucracy which is even more powerful than it was at the time of the independence. I don't know if you're old enough to remember this, but if you wanted even a passport, you had to get a gazetted officer to sign off on it. So this was all about control. Now, that clearly failed us. We began to reform the economy. But the way we did it so far is not by reforming the bureaucracy, but by reducing its powers of getting in the way of other people. So it's the same bureaucracy, but it now can interfere with people's lives a lot less than it could. And that is the growth of the last 30 years has basically been by withdrawing the state's ability to interfere with people's lives. It still can do quite a lot, but it can do less than before. But the bureaucracy itself has not changed. Okay, it's what it used to be. Now, at some point in time, we have got to reorient the bureaucracy from being a control bureaucracy to being a service provider bureaucracy. Now, I'm not blaming any individual IPS, IAS officer. The system is not set up to deliver services. So this requires a significant change in the way we think of our bureaucracy, and the bureaucracy thinks of itself. So I'll give you some example. Where is it that the delivery of services of the bureaucracy happens? It happens on the ground, right? Who is the person who does it? It's usually in the villages or whatever. It's a DM. In the city's municipal commissioner. But you'll be surprised to hear that these people are the most junior people in the bureaucracy. It's usually some 33, 34, 35-year-old who is the district magistrate, is probably there for only 18 months, not even good enough to understand the district. Whereas in the scope of the bureaucracy, this is a very junior person. So what you need to do is to reorient the bureaucracy such that more senior, experienced people are the people who are being DMs and municipal managers and so on. That's what they should be doing. Right? We don't need senior, experienced, talented people to be doing what they are led to do, to get, getting into more controlling kinds of jobs. That's where a bureaucrat ends up today after seniority, whereas in fact they should end up on the ground. You need, instead of 33-year-old, you need a 43-year-old in a district as district magistrate for 3-4 years.
And this is because of the momentum of the past.
It's the way the system was set up. It was a top-down system where the service delivery place is not where the talent or the energy and the seniority is. It is in the control further up.
I feel all this is again that art of economics at play. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, in a sense, yes.
In terms of this is theoretically what seems like the next right steps, based on where the world is at, based on where India is at. Do the current IAS officers, or just generally the whole bureaucracy, are they aware of this change that's going to come?
Well, some of these ideas are from them. You have to understand that the people who come into any service are a subset from the same society you and I live in. It's your cousin, my nephew who are joining the IAS today. So their views are also affected by the milieu in which we, live in, right? So that is, don't think that the views of the bureaucracy are very different. So if you go back to the 50s, they were the old ICS officers who became the first generation of bureaucrats in this country. So they continued with a sort of colonial kind of arrogant, looking down at the rest of society kind of view, even into the 50s and early 60s when they were there. By the time a new bunch came, their attitude was somewhat less condescending, but they had very controlling, socialist kind of worldview. So that was what was imported into the bureaucracy as well. Then We liberalized our economy. Now, it took some time for the change to happen because it took some time for our own mindsets to change. But the more recent inputs into the bureaucracy, the younger officers tend to also have a more fluid view. Very often their spouses are working outside in the private sector and so on. So it's not the old insular bureaucrats who have no exposure to anything other than files. So I think you have to understand we are ourselves evolving as a society.
Is the nature of the UPSC exam going to change going forward?
Well, I don't know. Maybe the people in UPSC should know that. But I think what I'm trying to say is that we need to begin to talk about administrative reform as a society. Eventually, what governments do is a reflection of what people generally want. And I can tell you that even within the bureaucracy, the younger echelons of the bureaucracy, they have a much more, I would say, open, market-oriented view. Even in fact, I would say even significant parts of those who are in senior positions today are very different from those who were there even a decade ago.
Okay.
Because remember, those who were a decade ago were hired in the 80s. Those who are now in senior positions were hired in the 90s. Now, in the next decade, those will be people who are actually hired in the 2000s. So they are all changing. And of course, the input flow is also changing. So you're getting people from smaller towns. They come from less patrician backgrounds. So they do not have all these old, ICS officer hang-ups. As I said, their spouses may be working in other fields. They have cousins, brothers, etc., who are successful in other fields. Okay. So you may be an entrepreneur, maybe a writer, maybe a podcaster, and they will not think of a podcaster somehow inferior.
I think the overarching conversation you're trying to have here is for people who aspire to be in the bureaucracy. You're trying to say, you're trying to say that, hey, look at other careers as well. Don't be demotivated if you fail your UPSC, or, why are you so hell-bent on that? I think.
Yeah, that is one bunch of it. But to the others, I'm saying, it's, if you have some other talents, please do those things.
For a better future.
But a better future. The country needs entrepreneurs. I need podcasters. I need sportsmen. I need architects. I need artists.
That aspiration to pass the UPSC exam comes from a place of serving the country. And maybe what you're trying to say is, hey, if you really want to serve the country, also look at these things.
Yeah, and it is also, I don't know if everybody who wants to join the UPSC wanted to serve the country in the past. Yeah, it has to do with who had the power. I mean, did the ICS officers originally join it to serve the country? Absolutely not. They were working for the British to actually colonize us. So the first generation of bureaucrats were actually collaborators with the British. So the point of the matter is, don't think that people are joining anything for any. Some may be joining for because they want to genuinely serve or whatever. A large proportion join because it pays well or it plays up to their aspiration of having power over fellow Indians or whatever it is. There may be all kinds of reasons why people join IAS or IPS or IRS or whatever other service it may be. I mean, let's not just pick on the IAS. There are other services as well. Yeah. The state services. There are all kinds of civil servants.
On a very primal level, it's higher status.
Yes, it is higher status. So all I'm trying to say is that, look, the world is a much more fluid place now. And you should allow for that.
Okay, fair. I'm going to share one tiny learning I've had, okay? When we began a Hindi podcast, I didn't know exactly what to anticipate from the Hindi audience other than definitely spiritual content will work, Bollywood will work, cricket will work. And it was a very big surprise for me as an urban Indian who has been born and raised in Mumbai, that there is this much hype and popularity when it comes to the top UPSC coaches of the country. Like our two most successful Hindi podcasts are Vikas Divyakirti sir and Awadh Oja sir. And when you speak to them, you understand why they're incredible teachers, incredible command over the language. But that's the kind of demand that even the masses have even on YouTube.
But I'm just telling you that's backward looking. Okay, because you are in Mumbai, you would not have heard of these people. So why aren't people in Mumbai aspiring to be that? Because here, the people you aspire to be are, want to be a corporate honcho, or you want to be an entrepreneur, maybe a Bollywood star. That is what is your mental image of your possibilities. In the Hindi heartland, so far, we didn't have that growth dynamic. So the person they saw was the local DM. So that is that's why I keep telling you, don't get too swayed by, some claims of national service, etc. Some of them may be there for that genuinely, but a lot of it is just the social status hierarchy that one is exposed to. Now, as UP goes through, you can already see major economic dynamics changing in UP, with investment going there and so on. Even in UP, this will change.
How far are we timeline?
I think it'll happen in the next decade. So it'll happen faster than you think. After all, I'm not just in Mumbai, even in Bangalore, people in Bangalore want to be, some sort of a great startup, or in Pune, they want to set up their own vaccine factory or whatever it is. You ultimately aspire to a lot of the people you see around you, in the milieu you live in. So I'm just telling you that is what will happen, and that is, we are not even unique in history, right? You look at a country like the US. Yes, there's still people who may want to, even in the US, want to join the bureaucracy there. But as the US became a developed country and other opportunities emerged, so there you want to be Warren Buffett, or you want to be Bill Gates, or you want to be Elon Musk, or you want to be a great basketball player, or whatever. You want to be Joe Rogan. All of those kinds of things will happen in India as well.
A couple of questions. One, explain what the bureaucracy does in 2024 to a 10-year-old. And the supplemental question is, what is the equivalent of that in America? Like, who does that equivalent job?
So America also has a bureaucracy. India also has the day-to-day running of your municipal services, your passport office, making sure law and order, some sort of a bureaucracy, government system runs it. That's how it will be. These are called public goods. And in most cases, some sort of a state or government system will run it. And that is true everywhere. The way they are hired, etc., may change, but by and large, there is a standing bureaucracy of some sort which does it.
I think that's what my question was. Yeah. What is the way that they're hired?
Well, they hire in many places. They have some systems of political appointees. So they bring in people from outside. We also have that, but there are fewer in number. I'm a political appointee, for example. But then, or you can call them lateral hires. We have different different ways of doing it. And then they have another system of hiring through interviews or whatever. They have a standing bureaucracy as well, who are hired in their way. They don't do it quite through the UPSC way, but they have some formal system of hiring people into the bureaucracy. Although it's again significantly more fluid than ours. But there are lifelong civil servants there as well.
Gotcha.
It is just that we have an obsession with this, and it really comes from a legacy, first from the pre-independence period of colonial hierarchy, then the socialist hierarchy, and then post 1991, even though growth has happened in certain parts of the country where, as you can see, the social status of the bureaucracy has gone down. In Mumbai, it's not a big deal. But in a less developed part of the country, it is still a very big deal. And all I'm saying is, as we become a more developed country, that will become less important. Maybe your classes on how to run a podcast will become the more popular thing.
Okay. Little tiny breakaway from this conversation. People have often asked me if I would ever enter politics. I don't know why.
Why don't you?
And I'll tell you why. Because I've interacted with politicians enough to know their reality, and I've interacted with people like yourself who are adjacent to the world of politics. I actually aspire to be Sanjeev Sanyal much more. In terms of if I had to work for the country, I really admire you as a human being, but I also really admire your job profile in terms of, I feel you're a little bit detached from the reality of politics, and yet you're doing something for your country, which is exactly where I'd like to be. Is that a fair assessment of your life?
Look, first of all, let me say that there is no one way of contributing either to society or living your life. There are multiple ways, depends on your thing. There are people suited to politics. Every society will have politicians. By the way, a life of a politician is a really tough life. And if you just ask an average member of parliament, very difficult. I mean, not only is he attending parliament, passing laws, etc., you will find they are being phoned by people in their constituency for all kinds of things, from getting job for their son, daughters, you have to attend their daughter's wedding. There is a hole in the road in front of somebody's house who you have never heard of. They think that the MP should personally come and fix it. It's a very tough life. And every society does need politicians. Even non-democracies need politicians of some sort, right? So the point of it is you need a political class. Human beings are a political species. And somebody will play that role. And it is good for good quality people to play that role, because if you don't, it's not like that vacuum will remain. Somebody else will fill it, and the people you don't want will fill it. So please don't say that there's something wrong with me joining politics. In fact, I am very keen that people, I'm not saying specifically you, but people who particularly don't come from dynastic families, so that you get new talent coming in.
What will that do?
Well, you need talent in every field. I need talent in sports. I also need talent in political class. After all, they do play an important role in driving the direction of the country. So that's why the point I'm making, yes, you also need technocrats like me to come in and contribute in our way. This is, as I said, in the very first podcast we did, please do not have this unidimensional view. Academics all say we all should put money into education, or we should all put or the medical guys will say, we need more money in medical. No, it's about the mix and evolving that mix given whatever resources you have. So given the talent pool we have, that talent pool has to be distributed through the system so that you get innovation in all kinds of areas. If it all ends up in UPSC or all ends up in podcasts, it's a bad thing.
Okay. The next segment is kind of related to politics. It's about electoral economics. Does that affect your job at all?
Not really. Not directly. Not directly. I'm not a practicing politician. I work with politicians, including the Prime Minister. But ultimately, they have to win the election. I don't. And so, my job is, as I said, much more technical. I have to take their inputs and, at some level, they supervise me, so to speak. And that's an important thing, because in a sense, that's how the people of this country do a feedback loop through people who actually press the buttons and so on. If that didn't happen, then, a dictatorship of the technocrats is also not something you wish for.
If the current government doesn't get re-elected, hypothetically, what happens to your job?
Well, as I said, I am a political appointee. So my job is concurrent with the current Prime Minister. Even if he returns, I will have to be reappointed.
Damn. Do you feel any pressure around election season?
No, I have had many professions in my life, and so I will take it as it goes.
Okay. Coming back to that art of economics conversation that you were having at the start, I have understood that especially when it comes to the current government, manufacturing as a career prospect has been pushed forward in terms of, hey, get into manufacturing, start manufacturing-based businesses. That's the best thing you can do for the country.
No, there's no one best thing. It depends on what your talent is. If you happen to be really interested in engineering, then this is a good thing to do. As I said, if you happen to be really interested in sports, that is not what you should be doing.
That's the cue that entrepreneurs take from online narratives, because we all know that you always listen to what the government is saying, and the government keeps nudging the average entrepreneur to consider getting into manufacturing. That's the message.
No, we want to encourage people to get into these different things, because we don't think adequate numbers of Indians are getting into it.
Yeah.
But I'm not saying this to any particular individual.
Gotcha.
Okay, so it's not like I'm going onto the street and catching a random person, hey, you must do manufacturing. No, we just think that they should, in a country our size, we need more manufacturing investment and more people, entrepreneurs entering this space. We have created PLI schemes and other things to encourage people to enter this space. But it is not the case that this is an advice to anybody specific. Ultimately, somebody has to do what is they are tuned to do themselves.
Okay. For an entrepreneur like myself who has had a fairly nice entrepreneurial journey in his 20s, I am thinking of the kind of businesses I would like to run in my 30s. And my head automatically goes to some form of manufacturing.
So
Because
if you want to get into manufacturing, you then go and look at the technology, understand the technology, figure out how to acquire land, build a building. They're completely different skill sets. Maybe you have those skill sets. I don't know you well enough. But all I'm trying to say is that a general encouragement of risk-taking, etc., including in manufacturing, but in other sectors, it could be AI, it could be drones, or whatever other sector it may be, that is different from saying that everybody needs to now do this and the government should be telling everybody. In fact, one of the points I'm trying to make right from the beginning of this is that we've got to get out of this thinking process that governments are supposed to decide where things should go. Government's job is to actually create the atmosphere, the background for other people to do their own thing, right? The government's job at the municipal or state level is to make your roads, make sure the law and order is fine. At the national level is to make sure defense is happening, your inflation is not spiraling out. The rupee is a well-regulated currency, whatever, those kinds of things. It is not, in general, the government's job to force you into any direction. And certainly not the job of... that's why I'm coming back. If aspirants to the UPSC are under the impression that once they have joined the services and become senior officials, their job will be to direct the economy. No, I do not think that's at all a good idea. The job is to fix the roads, not to be directing the economy in general. Now, once in a while, the political leadership, and that's why the politicians are important, may decide, with the inputs from technocrats and from senior bureaucrats, that maybe there is a reason to provide some extra help in this space. That may happen. But as a general principle, the job of the government is to create the background for the risk-taking of individuals, companies, and so on. Okay. It is not the job of the government to be going out there and saying, this is what you do. That is what top-down Soviet-style economy used to do. Something that China does to some extent, but China has a much more government-controlled system. And they are paying the price for the downsides to that system right now, with overinvestment in real estate and so on. There are some advantages to their system, there are some disadvantages, but that's their system, that's not our system.
The one thing I've understood again is that economists will bring their own personality, emotions into their work. It's just how that particular profession functions. We had Dr. Raghuram Rajan on the show, and he was against this thought of manufacturing. Because this is a very big public narrative right now. Like, whenever we have an entrepreneur on the show who is India first in terms of mindset, and not all of them are, but the ones who are always talk about manufacturing, which is why I posed that question to him. And that's the general narrative that the average Indian receives from the government, especially the entrepreneurs, that, hey, listen, think of getting into manufacturing. He was against this thought. He said that no, Indians' strength lies in service-based businesses and education. So these are the two.
So I disagree with Raghu completely on this. I think we are a large country of 1.4 billion people. We are now a $4 trillion economy. We are growing faster than everybody else. There's opportunities to do all kinds of things. Why should we leave manufacturing out somehow? Now, yes, historically, we have not been great at it, and we weren't able because our infrastructure wasn't good enough, or the government used to get in the way all the time, too much licensing, etc. Much of that has been solved. It may not be perfect, but much of it has been resolved to the point that there are parts of manufacturing where we are genuinely competitive. And in any case, in a world that is as fluid, the geopolitics is all over the shop, supply chains are uncertain, you want to have some indigenous capability for situations where supply chains break down, or a war happens, or some other thing happens. So even during COVID, we saw you have to have indigenous capability. And as I said, there are people with all kinds of skills, all kinds of predilections and talents. There will be a part of our population who is suited for manufacturing. And whether it's not just the entrepreneur, there are people who are good at, tightening screws. What about that guy? Why should he be answering phone calls from a BPO? Maybe that, So we have to have a full array of skills and a full array of activities. Now, I understand if you're Singapore, then you're stuck with having to take a few large bets, because otherwise you can't reach scale. But even there, they try to have, given their limitations, as much mix of things, because that is how you want resilience. That is how you allow for expression of different kinds of talents. That is how you allow for being able to innovate into certain areas. After all, I can't predict ex ante where the next generation of innovation will happen, and there are all kinds of innovations happening in all kinds of things. So if you're a large country, you have the benefit of being able to take different bets simultaneously, and we should. So this idea that, because in the last 25, 30 years, we have done well in services, we should continue to do that. How does he know? Maybe the next great thing is something totally different. I mean, it would be if you had gone back to 1950 and said, look, we are doing, we are an agricultural country, therefore we should only do agriculture. Would that be what Raghu would be arguing? No. So I think he is absolutely wrong on this.
Okay. And it's fair for experts in the domain of economics to have like their own viewpoint on things.
That's true.
That's how it works in your world, right?
The cutting edge of every field has disagreement. That's how progress is made. I have nothing personal against him. Incidentally, he's a personal friend. But we disagree on many things. This is one of our disagreements.
One of the top comments under that video is, we need a video with both of you in the same room explaining economics.
I have no problem with that. As I said, we disagree on many things, but that is true of the cutting edge of any field. If you get two physicists here on some cutting edge field of physics, they'll agree on a bunch of things, but they will have differences at the cutting edge. The only problem with economics is it's something that, unlike, say, arcane areas of science, economics hits everybody's pocket. So everybody has an opinion on this. But the fact of the matter is, it's not like at the cutting edge of economics there aren't disagreements. There clearly are. I mean, right now we are disagreeing.
But, okay, I'm trying to get into your mind a little bit and understand better. On a very human level, what causes that disagreement to form?
No. So, that's the creative sense of human existence, right? All progress is based on a thesis, which then somebody comes and disproves. And then in fact, Max Planck made a great statement about science, which is true for everything, that science progresses one funeral at a time. So the point he was making somewhat facetiously is that, look, certain views of the world are there. Some other person comes, he tries out some new views. Not every new view is good, but then through a Darwinian process of elimination, another view comes, more talented people come, new ideas come, new data comes, whatever it is, and then a new kind of narrative is thing. Then at the edges of that, some part of it get established. Okay, this goes from being theory to being considered basically fact. And then at the margins of that, another round of innovation of ideas and expressions happen. So we are at this point. There are people who have disagreements about the economic model India should take forward. I am of the view that we should go for the whole hog. In fact, we should there are areas of agriculture also where we should pay attention and make that grow. I think we are competitive even in certain parts of agriculture. And even the services sector is not, just software or something. There are all kinds of things, tourism, to competing in the new AI fields, to maybe doing utterly low technology activities as well. So there may be all kinds of areas where we are competitive. We should do the whole hog.
I've had this question in my heart since the first time I met you. So I'm going to ask you right now. The one thing I've learned about human beings through the show is that every human has his or her own favorite subject. Like everyone has like their own subject that they enjoy the most. Like for me, it's actually the subject of content. In terms of how do you constantly talk to the masses? Of course, for you, it's economics. Like, though you know your history and you've written books on history as well, fair to say that it's your...
Yeah. But I am generally interested. I'm a curious sort of chap. So my real interest is in the interconnections between various fields.
If you had to give that subject a name, what would it be?
I cannot give it a name. I would just say that, it's difficult to give it a subject. But my real interest is in looking at systems which are complex, interconnected systems and how they evolve.
I would still say it's economics in my eyes.
Yeah, so economics is a very large part of it, yes.
What would you say is PM Modi's subject?
I think his real interest is in reviving India as a civilization, which is partly how I see that as well. I mean, he really genuinely thinks that this is India's moment in history. and he is doing his part in, taking us through that Renaissance period.
Like his driving force in life is the revival of our country.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So another thing that I know is policy is also governed by human emotions at the end of the day. The human emotion for all the policy making that we're seeing in our country is the revival of the Sone ki Chidiya India that we've all heard about while growing up. Fair to say?
Yeah, in a sense, you could say that.
Anything
yes.
else you'd like to add to that?
Yes, and I think, of course, it doesn't mean very important that this is not a view of going back to something. I want to emphasize this because some people may then see it as, we must go back to the 3rd century BC. No. This is entirely a modernist idea. We want to be a modern country for our times. But yes, in terms of with our roots intact. So this is an important part of how we think about it. So, there's no point in trying to go back to the third. Clearly our society has changed, technology has changed, the world has changed. We are not trying to go back to any pristine golden past. And indeed, even our ancestors were up to date for their times. So if we had to go by the correct spirit of our ancestors, then the spirit is to be up to date in our times, but with a very clear rootedness going back to where, the continuity of our civilization, because let's be very clear, we are the oldest living civilization.
Okay. Speaking about civilization in general, and I dislike bringing this up in this manner, but it's a truth that I've learned from listening to a lot of Joe Rogan. The constant in human civilization over the last thousands of years has been war.
Yes.
We are a warring species.
Yes.
Firstly, could you explain how wars affect economics? Very basic question. And secondly, obviously from a 2024 perspective, these two wars, the Israel-Palestine war and the Ukraine-Russia war, how are they affecting our country?
See, as a general principle, war is bad because it's
for
extreme.
The world?
Yeah, and for the country, certainly for the countries involved. It can be good for certain countries if they happen to find some commercial way of profiting from it, say, for example, supplying arms or something to one of the countries, then they can profit from it. But generally speaking, war is bad. And certainly for the participants, it's definitely bad because it's destructive, people get killed, economic assets get blown up, bridges, roads, houses. So it is a messy thing. It does sometimes have some unintended benefits in terms of you do sometimes go through big technological shifts during these phases. So, for example, the Second World War is the phase where, for example, much of the rocket technology was developed, missile technology, V1, V2, etc., that the Germans developed, ended up ultimately in the space programs. Nuclear technologies developed for the Hiroshima-Nagasaki bomb eventually became the sources of nuclear energy and other things we have gone into. Similarly, in the First World War, there were huge dramatic improvements in aviation, the quality of cars and motors, all of them being developed for military reasons, but had other uses. So it's not like there is no benefit from a war. War does lead to digital shifts in technology sometimes because it allows you very quickly to build and test out technologies in ways you wouldn't do in peacetime. So there are these digital benefits, but from an economic perspective, it's generally a bad thing.
Break that down. Other than just the infrastructure destruction, I'm asking you about how it's affecting our country, which is geographically far.
As things stand in 2024, well, obviously, it causes disruption to us. Even the wars are not happening here. For example, the year in 2022, 23, there was a spike in oil prices. We are an oil importing country. Suddenly it caused problems. It's a different matter. We somehow managed it by importing oil from Russia and other things. But it's an uncomfortable place to be. Right? So the same thing is now happening with this war in Yemen, the war in Israel, and so on. It causes disruptions. So now, for example, we are having to send the Indian Navy to patrol the Red Sea and the Arabian Sea It's not a cheap thing to do, keeping your navy out there. It's an expensive business to have your warships there, but we have to do it because keeping the sea lanes open, that's key to trade. So war is generally a expensive diversion, and something we should try and avoid to the extent we can. Although, as I said, there can be unintended consequences of dramatic technological shifts that can happen during war, but it causes all kinds of disruptions. But as I said, it's part of the human condition.
It's constant in the human story.
Yes,
That goes to say that it's going to happen even in the future.
absolutely.
Very likely.
It's part of it's a constant in the human condition. The game is therefore, again, going back to the point we were talking about Atmanirbhar, while we do not wish to go to war, and do not want to be in a position where we are stuck with some military tensions with somebody, it is a good idea to be prepared because you do not know how things will pan out in the future. So again, huge emphasis on economic growth, but it is not the case that we are not looking at bolstering our navy, our air force, army, etc. New technologies are being continuously incorporated, and some of it we import. So we, at the same time that we import the Rafale, we are also trying to build the Tejas.
Okay. Are you trained for war-like situations?
No, economists are not usually trained for war-like situations, but all economists end up with dealing with war-like situations. We didn't deal with a war, but we did deal with COVID, 2 years of lockdown and so on. Pretty traumatic and quite warlike in some ways. Hugely expensive as a economic event, almost like a war. And many warlike things had to be done. Sure, you didn't have to manufacture cannons at a rapid pace, but you did have to manufacture vaccines and other such things, PPE kits, which in a scale which we had never imagined before. So nobody gets trained for doing this because there's no training for it except to go through it.
Please correct me if I'm wrong, but again, on a primal level, your job would be, hey, where can I pull the money out of in order to fuel money here to create this change in society?
That is not just the only thing. Many things break down under those circumstances. So, for example, if you go back to April of 2020, you will remember we were one of the first to do a lockdown, but very quickly everybody else did a lockdown. And then the world began to completely shut down. I mean, supply chains broke down, movement of people broke down. Even in the European Union, internal borders, which had kind of dissolved, suddenly popped up. And there is real problems that are happening even in keeping day-to-day stuff running. So under those circumstances, neither the UN nor WHO, I will remember all this, they were not particularly helpful to us. So how do you keep the world system running? So the only institution that somehow kept things going and sort of played some role was G20. And at that time, I used to be the co-chair of one of the most important tracks of G20 called the Framework Working Group. So the Framework Working Group then created something called the G20 Action Plan, which is a relatively short document for basic protocols to be kept going, how to keep the system going, how to keep supply chains running, financial payments and financial systems. Because in a system that things are breaking down, you need some basic protocols. So I was one of the main architects of that document. I typed it out literally on my laptop. And then it was signed on to by the finance ministers and central bank governors of the 20 largest economies, and later on by the leaders, as the prime minister and presidents. And that's what kept the world economy going for 2 years. Now, did I have training to doing this? Absolutely not. I had no idea that I was ever going to do that. I mean, I wrote this in May of 2020. If you had asked me in the beginning of March of 2020, I would never have guessed that I would be typing it out. But there was nobody else on the planet who knew how to do it either. So I did that, and of course with inputs from my colleagues from other countries in the Framework Working Group. Yes, so we did it, and it worked.
Okay. I think a part of me is also asking the historian in you this. Can one predict when a war is going to happen?
No, you can't. That is the whole point that I was trying to make about the world is an unpredictable place. It is a non-deterministic, unpredictable place which can go in multiple directions at every moment in history. So anybody who makes these grand predictions about how they think the world will be, in a few areas you can sort of tell, like, demographic transition takes a long time. So you can have some sense of where demographics is going. You can tell, if somebody exists today, they're probably going to age in a few years' time. So something like that, maybe. But a very large range of things you can't. And so I am consequently suspicious of human ability to predict how things will pan out in the future. This includes even people who invent things. So even if you have invented a particular technology, I do not trust entirely your ability to even predict how it will be used. If you go back 20 years back, those guys who were inventing social media, they were of the opinion that social media would actually lead to everybody talking to each other and move people to the middle. But in fact, the way the algorithms work, they moved everybody into echo chambers, and right. So I don't think the people who were inventing social media 20 years ago, they were being cynical and lying to us. I think they just didn't understand. So this is the same thing true of businessmen. It's true of even artists. It is true of politicians. It's true of bureaucrats. And hence my suspicion, by the way, going back, of the ability of governments to be able to tell people what to do. I think government should keep things open and keep the machine running through feedback and doing basic things right. It is not really the business of governments who are telling individual citizens, inventors, writers, what they should be doing, for the most part, unless they're doing something that is quite definitely harmful. So if you are a businessman who is selling opium to, and drugs to people, yes, it should intervene. But it isn't, got to be very careful about getting involved in directing how technology will exactly pan out. Even when the government invests in particular technologies like space or AI or whatever it may be doing, it won't really know what it'll end up getting used to. So always be very skeptical about the human ability to predict the future.
Sanjeev Sanyal, sir, that's it.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
I hope you had fun in this more general conversation.
Yeah, I did.
Your presence brings value because of not just your skill set, but all the experience that you're gaining. I'm sure even the last 1 year, you're a fully different person, knowing...
I don't know. So that you have to tell me. Others have to judge it. But I don't know how interesting people find. And one of the things I'm trying to do is get people away from UPSC.
Wow. That message has come through.
What the hell, man? Everybody wants to do you. Why? Why do you want to be a joint secretary? Why did you want to be Elon Musk? I said that also.
Okay. Straight from the government. That's all I'll say. Sanjeev sir, looking forward to our next conversation.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. So that was the episode for today. When someone is a TRS all-star, where I know they've got an infinite number of pieces inside them, I wait for this point where I can do these topic-free conversations, as in you just make the all-star sit in front of you and you just get talking. And trust me, there's very, very few people like that I have met throughout the course of these 600 plus podcasts. There's very few people who I can speak to about close to any topic and they'll give me some valuable material. But this says a lot about that person's experience of life and how often do you get to talk to as articulate a technocrat as Mr. Sanjeev Sanyal. It's always a pleasure speaking with him. Post the shoot, me and him had a bit of a debate on the length of the podcast. My angle was that we should keep it very long. His angle was that we should cut it down to a maximum of 1 hour, 15 minutes. Please tell me what you thought of the length of this kind of a conversation in the comment section, because these are heavy conversations. So I'd love for you guys to comment down below and settle the debate between the legend and myself. What I will say is that Sanjeev sir will be back on the show very soon. So please give us your topics that you guys want us to discuss for the next time as well. And until next time, from Ranveer and the team, we'll see you very, very soon.